The green glow of the sonar display cast eerie shadows across Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen's face as she leaned closer to the screen, her breath catching in her throat. It was 200 hours, and the USS Ronald Reagan cut through the dark waters of the South China Sea like a steel beast, unaware of what lurked beneath. Around her, the Combat Information Center hummed with the quiet efficiency of the night watch, keyboards clicking, radar stations beeping softly, the distant rumble of the carrier's nuclear reactors vibrating through the deck plates. Sarah had been staring at the anomaly for 17 minutes now, and her hands had started to tremble. 12 years. She'd spent 12 years analyzing underwater acoustics, learning to distinguish between whales and warships, between thermal layers and torpedoes, between the ocean's natural symphony and the man-made threats that prowled beneath the waves. She could identify a Russian Aquila-class submarine by the specific frequency of its propeller cavitation. She could tell you whether a sonar contact was a school of tuna or a Chinese diesel boat trying to hide in the thermocline. Her ears, trained, experienced, reliable, had never failed her. Until tonight, she'd never seen anything like this. The signature on her screen pulsed with an irregular rhythm that made her stomach clench. It was big displacement suggesting something the size of a Lowe's Angels-class submarine, but the acoustic profile was all wrong. Too quiet, too smooth. The propulsion system produced almost no cavitation noise, which should have been impossible for something that massive. And the metallic echoes bouncing back from her active sonar pings had a strange, almost crystalline quality that didn't match anything in the Navy's extensive database of known vessels. "Something's wrong," she whispered to herself, pulling up comparison charts on her secondary monitor. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, running the signature through every identification algorithm the Navy had developed. Nothing matched. Not American, not Russian, not Chinese, at least not any Chinese submarine the U.S. intelligence community had cataloged. Petty Officer Marcus Reynolds, her junior sonar technician, noticed her tension. "Ma'am, you seeing something?" Sarah's mouth felt dry. "Get me the Admiral right now." Reynolds's eyes widened. Waking up a flag officer at 2 in the morning was career suicide unless you had something concrete. "Commander, are you sure? Admiral Holbrook doesn't like being." "Now, Reynolds, this is not a drill." 5 minutes later, Admiral Richard Holbrook strode into the CIC, his uniform hastily thrown on, his weathered face carved with irritation. At 62, he was a man who'd commanded carriers through 2 wars, who'd spent 40 years in the Navy, and who didn't appreciate junior officers disrupting his sleep. Behind him came Captain Morrison, the Reagan's commanding officer, looking concerned and curious in equal measure. "This better be good, Commander," Holbrook growled, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority that made junior officers straighten their spines involuntarily. Sarah stood, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd practiced this moment in her head, trying to find the right words that would make him listen, that would convey the urgency without sounding hysterical. "Sir, we have an unidentified subsurface contact at bearing 270, range approximately 12 nautical miles, depth estimated at 400 feet. The acoustic signature doesn't match anything in our database." Holbrook moved to her station, his experienced eyes scanning the display. For a moment, just a brief moment, Sarah thought she saw concern flicker across his face. Then it vanished, replaced by dismissive confidence. "Whales, Commander," he said flatly. "Blue whales, possibly humpbacks. This time of year they migrate through these waters." Sarah's professional composure cracked slightly. "Sir, with respect, I've analyzed whale songs for over a decade. This is not biological. Look at the metallic return here." She pointed to a specific frequency spike on her screen and the propulsion harmonics. "This is machinery, Admiral. Something's down there and it's packing us." "Packing us?" Holbrook's voice rose slightly, and several other officers in the CIC glanced over nervously. "Commander Chen, Are you seriously suggesting that an enemy submarine is shadowing a carrier strike group in international waters without us having any prior intelligence? Do you understand how paranoid that sounds? The word paranoid hit Sarah like a slap. She'd heard it before, whispered behind her back by male officers who resented her rise through the ranks, muttered by instructors at the Naval Academy who thought women didn't belong on warships. She'd spent years proving she wasn't emotional, wasn't hysterical, wasn't paranoid. She was competent. She was good at her job, maybe the best sonar analyst in the Pacific Fleet. But now, facing Admiral Holbrook's dismissive glare, all those years of proving herself felt suddenly fragile. "Sir," she tried again, her voice steadier than she felt, "I'm not being paranoid. I'm telling you what my instruments and my experience are showing me. This signature is anomalous, it's deliberate, and it's tracking our movement patterns." She pulled up a tactical display showing the contact's course over the past hour. "Look, every time we alter course it adjusts within minutes. That's not whale behavior." Captain Morrison leaned in, studying the data. "Sarah might have a point, Admiral. The pattern is suggestive of—" "Captain," Holbrook interrupted, his tone making it clear the discussion was over, "I've been hunting submarines since before Commander Chen was born. I know the difference between a threat and an overreaction." He turned back to Sarah, and his eyes had gone cold. "Are you questioning my judgment, Commander?" The CIC had gone absolutely silent. Everyone knew what was happening. A flag officer being challenged by a lieutenant commander, rank and experience being pitted against technical expertise and data. In the Navy's rigid hierarchy, there was only one acceptable outcome to such a confrontation. Sarah felt the weight of every eye in the room. She could back down, apologize, say she'd made an error in analysis. She could preserve her career, maintain the Admiral's goodwill, avoid becoming known as difficult or emotional or, that word again, paranoid. But she'd seen the data. She knew what her instruments were telling her, and somewhere deep in her gut, that instinct developed over 12 years of listening to the ocean's secrets was screaming danger. She straightened her spine and met the Admiral's gaze directly. "Sir, I'm not questioning your judgment. I'm reporting a potential threat based on empirical data and my professional analysis. Something is down there, and I believe it represents a risk to this strike group." For a long moment, Holbrook stared at her, his jaw working silently. The silence stretched out, oppressive and thick. Then his expression hardened into something that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Your report is noted and dismissed," he said, each word clipped and final. "Log the contact as biological and maintain standard patrol. Commander Chen, I want to see you in my quarters at 800. He turned on his heel and strode toward the exit, then paused at the door. "And Commander, in the future, learn the difference between genuine threats and whale songs. Stop wasting my time." The door closed behind him with a heavy clang. Sarah stood frozen at her station, feeling the stares of her fellow officers. Some looked sympathetic. Most looked away quickly, not wanting to be associated with her mistake. Captain Morrison touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture of support that somehow made everything worse, then followed the Admiral out. Alone at her sonar station, Sarah looked back at the screen. The anomalous signature was still there, still packing them through the dark water, still wrong in ways she couldn't fully articulate but knew in her bones. "Ma'am," Reynolds spoke softly, "what do you want me to do?" Sarah took a shaky breath. "Log it as biological like he ordered, but Reynolds," she met his eyes, "keep monitoring it, record everything, and if anything changes, anything at all, you wake me immediately. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." As Sarah walked out of the CIC into the carrier's fluorescent-lit corridors, she had no idea that she'd just set in motion a chain of events that would end her career, vindicate her expertise, and ultimately change the way the United States Navy thought about threats in the modern age. All she knew was that something deadly was swimming beneath them. And nobody was listening. The 6 hours between 200 and 800 were the longest of Sarah Chen's life. She lay in her cramped officer's quarters, staring at the steel ceiling inches above her rack, listening to the carrier's endless mechanical symphony, the hum of ventilation systems, the distant clang of hatches, the muffled footsteps of sailors moving through the passageways. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that sonar signature, pulsing like a malevolent heartbeat beneath their hull. At 7:45 she showered, dressed in her most immaculate uniform, and checked her reflection in the small mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but her bearing was crisp, professional. Whatever was about to happen in Admiral Holbrook's quarters, she would face it with dignity. The walk through the carrier's maze of corridors felt like a death march. Sailors she passed averted their eyes. Word had already spread through the ship's rumor mill. By breakfast, everyone knew that Lieutenant Commander Chen had woken the Admiral at 200 to report whales as enemy submarines. The story had grown in the telling, becoming more embarrassing with each retelling. She heard whispers following her, paranoid, cracking under pressure, typical woman officer overreacting. Admiral Holbrook's quarters were located on the O3 level, a privilege of rank that afforded him actual space, a bedroom, office, and small conference area that seemed palatial compared to standard officer accommodations. His aide, a stone-faced lieutenant, ushered her in without a word. The Admiral sat behind his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose, reviewing a document. He didn't look up. Sarah stood at attention, her heart pounding, as seconds stretched into minutes. This was a power play, making her stand there, making her wait, reinforcing the hierarchy. Finally, Holbrook removed his glasses and looked at her. His expression was carved from granite. "Commander Chen, in my 40 years of naval service, I've learned that there are two types of officers, those who can handle the pressure of command decisions and those who cannot." He picked up a manila envelope from his desk. "Your performance last night demonstrated a fundamental lack of judgment that concerns me deeply." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. "You woke me and the ship's commanding officer in the middle of the night to report biological contacts as enemy vessels. You insisted on your analysis despite my assessment. You questioned my judgment in front of junior enlisted personnel." His voice grew harder. "That's not competence, Commander. That's insubordination dressed up as expertise." "Sir, I was reporting what my instruments—" "Your instruments showed whale songs." Holbrook's fist hit the desk, making her flinch despite herself. "For 12 years you've been analyzing sonar, and suddenly you can't tell the difference between marine mammals and submarines. Or perhaps," his eyes narrowed, "you knew exactly what they were, but you wanted to prove something. Make yourself look important. Show the Admiral that you're smarter than he is." The accusation was so unfair, so completely wrong, that Sarah felt rage building in her chest. But she forced it down, kept her voice level. "That's not true, sir. I reported a genuine anomaly because it's my duty to." "Your duty," Holbrook interrupted, "is to follow orders and trust the judgment of senior officers, something you've clearly forgotten." He slid the envelope across the desk. "Inside, you'll find transfer orders. Effective immediately, you're being reassigned to Naval Base San Diego for administrative duties. You'll be processing logistics reports for the Supply Command." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Administrative duties, Supply Command. It was career death, taking a decorated combat officer and putting her behind a desk to count paper clips. Everyone would know what it meant. Banishment, punishment, the end of any hope for advancement. "Sir, please," her voice cracked slightly and she hated herself for it. "I've given 12 years to the Navy. My record is spotless. I have commendations for—" "Your record was spotless," Holbrook said coldly. "Until last night, when you demonstrated that you crack under pressure. When stakes are high, Commander Chen, officers need to be reliable, not hysterical." There it was, the word she'd been dreading, hysterical. The weapon always deployed against women who spoke too loudly, who pushed too hard, who refused to smile and nod. "I am not hysterical," Sarah said, her voice like steel. "I am a trained analyst reporting data that concerned me. If I'm wrong, show me how. Show me the analysis that proves those were whales. Because I've reviewed my recordings a dozen times and nothing about that signature is biological." For a moment, just a heartbeat, something flickered in Holbrook's eyes. Uncertainty, doubt. Then it vanished, replaced by cold authority. "This conversation is over. You have 4 hours to pack your belongings and transfer to the COD aircraft. Dismissed." Sarah took the envelope with numb fingers. She wanted to throw it back at him, wanted to scream that he was making a catastrophic mistake, that something deadly was lurking beneath them while he played politics with her career. But she was still a naval officer. She still had her pride. She saluted crisply, "Sir." The walk back to her quarters was a blur. Officers she'd worked with for months suddenly found urgent business elsewhere when they saw her coming. Only her friend, Lieutenant Commander James Park from the engineering department, stopped her in the passageway. "Sarah," I heard, "I'm so sorry." His voice was barely a whisper. He couldn't risk being seen as too sympathetic. "Don't be," she said, forcing her voice steady. "I reported what I saw. I'd do it again." "I know you would. That's what makes you good at your job." He glanced around nervously. "For what it's worth, I believe you, but Holbrook, he's making an example of you, showing everyone what happens when you challenge him." After he left, Sarah entered her quarters and stared at the small space that had been her home for 8 months. Photographs of her family, her Naval Academy graduation, her first ship assignment. 12 years of service, reduced to a few boxes of personal effects. As she packed, her phone buzzed with text messages. Some supportive, most from people covering their own backs. "Sorry to hear. These things happen. Maybe it's for the best." Each message felt like another small betrayal. The worst moment came when she returned to the CIC to retrieve her personal items from her sonar station. Petty Officer Reynolds was there, looking miserable. On the screen behind him, she could see the sonar display. The anomalous contact was still there, still tracking them. "Ma'am," Reynolds said quietly, "it's still following us. I've been watching it. The pattern hasn't changed." Sarah's throat tightened. "Keep recording everything. And Reynolds, trust your training. If something feels wrong, it probably is." He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. 4 hours later, Sarah stood on the carrier's flight deck, her sea bag at her feet, waiting for the COD aircraft that would ferry her off the ship. The wind whipped her hair as she looked out at the gray expanse of the South China Sea. Somewhere beneath those waves, something was waiting, watching, and now there would be no one aboard the Reagan who understood what they were dealing with. The COD's engines roared to life. A junior officer, someone she didn't even know, helped load her gear. As the aircraft lifted off the deck, Sarah pressed her face to the small window, watching the USS Ronald Reagan shrink beneath her. 75 aircraft, 5,000 sailors, 90,000 tons of American naval power. And something hunting it in the deep. The carrier disappeared into the haze, and with it, Sarah's career, her reputation, everything she'd worked for. But worse than losing her career was the gnawing certainty in her gut. She'd been right, and now no one was listening. Somewhere in the depths below, whatever was down there was still waiting. Still watching. Still hunting. The Naval Base San Diego office building was a soul-crushing monument to bureaucratic monotony. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting that hummed incessantly, and the smell of stale coffee and photocopier toner. Sarah's new office was a cubicle in the Supply Command's logistics division, a space so small she could touch both walls simultaneously. No window, no view of the ocean, just beige fabric partitions and the endless drone of keyboards clicking. Her new commanding officer, Commander Patricia Walsh, had been apologetically blunt during their first meeting. "Look, Chen, I know you're overqualified for this. Everyone knows why you're here. Keep your head down, process your reports, and maybe in a year or two, you can request a transfer somewhere better. Don't make waves." Don't make waves. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. She spent her days reviewing supply requisitions from ships scattered across the Pacific Fleet, toilet paper inventories, bulk food orders, equipment maintenance schedules, work that a competent petty officer could handle in their sleep, work designed to slowly erode her soul, to remind her daily of how far she'd fallen. The other officers in the building treated her like a ghost. They knew her story, or rather, they knew Holbrook's version of it, the officer who'd cracked under pressure, who'd woken an admiral over whales, who'd been so paranoid she'd endangered her own career. At lunch, conversations stopped when she approached. Invitations to after-work drinks never came. She was toxic, a cautionary tale, the officer nobody wanted to be associated with. 3 weeks into her exile, Sarah sat alone in her cubicle at 1900 hours, long after everyone else had gone home. The building was silent except for the security guard's footsteps echoing through empty hallways. On her government-issued computer screen was a supply request for hydraulic fluid. She'd been staring at the same form for 20 minutes, unable to care, unable to focus. Her personal laptop sat in her bag, forbidden on the Navy network but calling to her. For 3 weeks she'd resisted. For 3 weeks she tried to be the good officer, to accept her punishment, to let it go. But every night she dreamed of that sonar signature. Every night she woke in a cold sweat, seeing the green glow of the display, hearing the irregular pulse that shouldn't exist. And every night she wondered, was the Reagan still safe? Was that thing still down there? Her hands trembled as she pulled out her personal laptop. Before leaving the carrier, she'd done something technically forbidden but morally necessary. She'd copied all her sonar recordings from that night onto an encrypted drive. Evidence. Proof that she wasn't crazy, wasn't paranoid. She plugged in her headphones and pulled up the audio files, listening again to the underwater symphony that had destroyed her career. The rhythmic pulse of the Reagan's propellers, the ambient ocean noise, shrimp clicks, distant whale songs, the subtle whoosh of currents. And there, buried in the frequencies between 200 and 400 hertz, that anomalous signature. Sarah ran the audio through spectral analysis software she'd purchased with her own money, better than what the Navy had given her access to in this bureaucratic purgatory. New patterns emerged. The signature wasn't just irregular, it was adaptive. Every few minutes, the frequency shifted slightly, as if the source was actively trying to avoid detection. That was sophisticated. That was intentional. That was terrifying. A sound behind her made Sarah jump. She spun around to find an older man in civilian clothes standing at her cubicle entrance. He was in his 70s, weathered face, sharp eyes, and something about his bearing screamed retired military. Lieutenant Commander Chen. His voice was gravelly from years of shouting over jet engines. Sarah quickly closed her laptop. "Can I help you?" "Name's Jack Brennan, retired Rear Admiral, submarine warfare specialist. I heard about what happened to you." He glanced around the empty office. "Mind if we talk, somewhere more private?" 20 minutes later, they sat in a dingy bar 3 blocks from the base. The kind of place where sailors and veterans drank cheap beer and swapped sea stories. Brennan bought them both whiskeys and studied Sarah with unsettling intensity. 23 years ago, he began without preamble, I was commanding officer of the USS Key West, a Los Angeles-class attack boat. We were on patrol in the South China Sea, same waters where you detected your anomaly, and I found something. He took a long drink. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. Soviet submarine technology, except the Soviets had been gone for years. Advanced propulsion, stealth capabilities that shouldn't have been possible. Sarah's heart raced. What happened? I reported it up the chain, insisted we had contact with an unknown vessel. Brennan's laugh was bitter. They called me paranoid, said I was seeing ghosts, that I'd been underwater too long. They didn't remove me from command, couldn't afford to lose an experienced submarine skipper, but they buried my report so deep it might as well have never existed, told me to forget about it. Did you? Hell no, I kept investigating on my own time. Found 3 other commanders who'd reported similar contacts over the years, all dismissed, all told to stop being paranoid. He leaned closer. Chen, whatever you saw out there, it's real. And it's been real for a long time. The Navy just doesn't want to admit that someone has technology we can't detect. Sarah felt vindication and horror in equal measure. Why are you telling me this? Because you did what I should have done. You stood your ground. You reported the truth even when it cost you everything. Brennan pulled out a worn notebook filled with handwritten notes, coordinates, dates. I've been tracking these incidents for 2 decades. 15 confirmed reports of anomalous contacts in the South China Sea. All dismissed, all buried. But the pattern is clear. Someone is testing us, learning our patrol routes, studying our detection capabilities. The Chinese. That's my guess. They've been developing diesel-electric submarines with air-independent propulsion, boats that can stay submerged for weeks without surfacing. Combine that with advanced acoustic dampening, and you've got a submarine that's nearly invisible to traditional sonar. He tapped his notebook. The technology has been theoretical for years. I think they've made it operational. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If Brennan was right, if these stealth submarines were real, then the entire Pacific Fleet was vulnerable. Carrier strike groups could be shadowed, tracked, studied without ever knowing the threat was there. It was an intelligence nightmare. I need to report this, she said. Get this information to someone who will listen. Brennan shook his head sadly. You're already radioactive, Chen. You report this, they'll say you're obsessed, that you can't let it go. They'll use it as more evidence that you're unstable. Hell, they might even suggest a psychiatric evaluation. The words stung because they were probably true. Sarah stared into her whiskey glass, seeing her reflection distorted in the amber liquid. Her career was already destroyed. Her reputation was in ruins. And now she had information that could save lives but no way to make anyone listen. So what do I do? Her voice was barely a whisper. Brennan met her eyes. You wait, you document everything. You build a case so airtight that when the moment comes, and it will come, you'll be ready. He slid his notebook across the table. These are my notes. 20 years of research. It's yours now. Why? Because I'm 74 years old and tired of watching the Navy make the same mistakes. Because you're young enough to still fight. And because, he paused, his expression softening, because I was you once. I know what it's like to be right and have nobody believe you. It's a special kind of hell. Sarah took the notebook with shaking hands, feeling the weight of decades of ignored warnings, dismissed reports, and silenced officers. That night back in her cramped apartment off base, Sarah sat at her kitchen table surrounded by audio files, spectral analyses, and Brennan's meticulous notes. She created a detailed database, cross-referencing coordinates, dates, and acoustic signatures. A pattern emerged. Something was systematically mapping U.S. naval operations in the Pacific. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Haven't heard from you in weeks, sweetie. Are you okay? Sarah typed and deleted several responses. How could she explain? How could she tell her family that her career was over, that she'd been exiled for telling the truth, that somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, a threat was growing while everyone ignored it? Finally she typed, I'm fine, Mom, just busy with work, love you. The lie tasted bitter. As Sarah fell asleep that night, her laptop still glowing with sonar data, she didn't know that 8,000 miles away, the USS Ronald Reagan was sailing through the same contested waters. She didn't know that the anomalous contact was still there, still tracking. She didn't know that in 72 hours, everything would change. But deep in her gut, that instinct developed over 12 years of listening to the ocean's secrets whispered a warning. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Captain Marcus Webb of the USS Connecticut had been commanding nuclear submarines for 16 years, and he'd never missed a scheduled communication check-in. Not once. It was drilled into submarine commanders from their first day of training. Communication protocols were sacred. They kept you alive. They let the fleet know you weren't lying at the bottom of the ocean in a titanium coffin. But at 1400 hours on a gray Thursday in the South China Sea, Captain Webb made a decision that violated every protocol he'd ever learned. He ordered his boat to go silent. 8,000 feet above him, Admiral Richard Holbrook stood on the bridge of the USS Ronald Reagan, unaware that his world was about to collapse. The day had been routine, flight operations proceeding smoothly, the carrier group maintaining standard patrol patterns through contested but international waters. Holbrook sipped coffee and reviewed intelligence briefings, feeling the comfortable weight of command. His communications officer, Lieutenant Chen, no relation to Sarah, but the name still made Holbrook flinch slightly, approached with a tablet. "Sir, USS Connecticut missed their 1400 check-in." Holbrook glanced at his watch. 14:15. Give them 15 minutes, could be a comm equipment issue. "Yes, sir." But 15 minutes became 30, then an hour. At 1500, Holbrook's coffee had gone cold, and a knot was forming in his stomach. He kept his expression neutral. Admirals didn't show concern in front of junior officers, but his mind was calculating probabilities. Submarine communication failures happen, but they had redundant systems, backup protocols, emergency frequencies. "Try raising them on ELF," he ordered, referring to the extremely low-frequency system that could penetrate deep water. "And get me a sitrep from all other boats in the area." The CIC became a hive of quiet urgency. Radio operators cycled through every frequency. Other submarines in the strike group reported no contact with the Connecticut. The P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft was scrambled to fly search patterns, its magnetic anomaly detector sweeping the ocean for the submarine's massive metal hull. Nothing. By 1700, 3 hours of silence. Pacific Fleet Command was on the line. Admiral Patricia Thornton's voice crackled through the secure satellite connection, sharp with concern. "Rick, what the hell is going on out there? Why has a nuclear submarine gone dark?" Holbrook felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the air-conditioned bridge. "Ma'am, we're conducting a comprehensive search." The Connecticut was operating in assigned patrol sectors, conducting routine surveillance operations. There's been no indication of. "No indication," Thornton's voice rose. "A nuclear submarine carrying 134 sailors and enough firepower to start World War III has vanished, and you're telling me there was no indication?" "Admiral, Holbrook stopped, a memory tugging at his mind. Sarah Chen's face 3 weeks ago insisting that something was tracking them, his own dismissive voice, "Wales, Commander." No, that was impossible. That contact had been biological. He'd been certain. Hadn't he? "Admiral Holbrook," Thornton's voice snapped him back. "I'm sending Admiral Reeves from 7th Fleet to take tactical command of the search operation. You are to provide him with every resource at your disposal. And Rick, I want a full brief on any unusual activity in your operating area for the past month. Everything." The line went dead. Captain Morrison appeared at Holbrook's elbow, his face grave. "Sir, we need to consider the possibility that the Connecticut encountered a hostile vessel." "On what basis?" Holbrook's voice came out sharper than intended. "We have no intelligence suggesting Chinese submarines in this sector." "Actually, sir," Morrison hesitated. 3 weeks ago, Commander Chen reported an anomalous sonar contact. I reviewed her analysis after she was transferred. The acoustic signature was unusual, and the coordinates were within 10 nautical miles of Connecticut's last known position. The knot in Holbrook's stomach became a fist of ice. "That contact was biological. I reviewed it personally." "Yes, sir, but Chen was our best sonar analyst. If she thought it was anomalous..." Morrison trailed off, knowing he was stepping into dangerous territory. Holbrook turned away, staring out at the ocean. Somewhere beneath those gray waves, 134 American sailors might be in trouble, and if he'd ignored a warning that could have prevented it. No, he couldn't think like that. Chen had been wrong, paranoid, overreacting. But doubt gnawed at him. At 1900, 5 hours of silence, Holbrook stood in his quarters holding the file he'd tried to forget. Sarah Chen's report from 3 weeks ago, the one he'd dismissed and buried. He read it now with growing horror, seeing details he'd glossed over in his initial review. The systematic analysis, the comparison charts, the professional, measured language of an expert reporting a genuine concern. His hands shook as he read her conclusion. Recommend immediate course alteration and deployment of additional ASW assets to investigate contact. Signature suggests possible advanced submarine technology. She'd been trying to protect them, and he destroyed her career for it. The phone rang. Holbrook grabbed it. Yes. Sir, we have the P-8's preliminary report. The communications officer's voice was tight. They detected a faint magnetic anomaly at coordinates 21, 4 degrees N, 117, 8 degrees E. It's moving, sir, and it matches the location from Commander Chen's report 3 weeks ago. Holbrook's blood turned to ice water. Get me every sonar recording from that sector, now. And, he paused, the words tasting like ashes, find me Commander Chen's original audio files, all of them. 30 minutes later, Holbrook sat in the CIC wearing headphones, listening to the recording Sarah had made. The sonar technician, a young petty officer who'd worked under Chen, provided analysis. See here, sir. That frequency pattern between 200 and 400 hertz, that's not biological. Whales don't modulate like that. And look, he pulled up a spectrogram. Every time we changed course, this contact adjusted within minutes. It was tracking us. Why didn't anyone else catch this? Holbrook asked, though he already knew the answer. Sir, Commander Chen was the only one who would have recognized it. She had more experience analyzing acoustic data than anyone on the ship after she was transferred. The petty officer didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. At 2000, 6 hours of silence, Holbrook made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. He opened a secure communication channel to Pacific Fleet Command and requested Commander Sarah Chen's service record and current contact information. Admiral Thornton answered personally. Rick, please tell me you have good news about the Connecticut. No, ma'am, but I have information that may be relevant to the search. The words came hard. 3 weeks ago, one of my officers reported an anomalous sonar contact in this area. I dismissed the report as biological. I was wrong. Silence on the line. Then, which officer? Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen. I transferred her to Naval Base San Diego for reporting the contact against my assessment. Another silence, longer this time. When Thornton spoke again, her voice was ice. You removed your best sonar analyst for doing her job correctly, and now we have a missing submarine in the exact location she flagged as a threat. Yes, ma'am. Get me everything Chen reported. Every recording, every analysis, every word. And Rick, when this is over, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about your judgment. At 21:30, more than 7 hours of silence, Holbrook stood alone on the bridge watching the sun set over the South China Sea. Somewhere in that darkening water, the USS Connecticut was either hiding or dying. 134 families would go to bed tonight not knowing if their sailors were coming home. And it was his fault. He'd ignored the warning. He'd silenced the one person who could have prevented this. His executive officer approached quietly. Sir, Pacific Command has authorized us to get Commander Chen on the line. They want her analysis of current sonar data. They're bringing her back. Holbrook nodded numbly. Sarah Chen would return, vindicated and probably furious. She would be proven right in the worst possible way. and he would be remembered as the admiral whose ego cost American lives. At 2200, Lieutenant Chen, the communications officer, called out urgently, "Sir, we're receiving an emergency transmission on guard frequency. It's the Connecticut." Holbrook ran to the communications station, his heart pounding. The radio crackled with static and Captain Webb's voice, strained and urgent. "Reagan, this is Connecticut. We are surfacing at emergency depth. Hull integrity compromised. We were engaged by unknown vessel. Repeat, engaged by unknown vessel with characteristics matching SUBLANT report from 3 weeks ago. Commander Chen was right. It's real and it's been hunting us." The CIC erupted in controlled chaos. Holbrook stood frozen, Webb's words echoing in his ears. Commander Chen was right. He destroyed an officer's career for telling the truth. And now the truth was surfacing with a damaged submarine and a crew that had barely escaped with their lives. The phone rang again. Holbrook picked it up with a hand that shook. "Admiral Holbrook," Admiral Thornton's voice was cold as death, "get Commander Chen on the next flight to the Reagan, and pray that she's willing to help clean up your mess." At 3:40 hours, every radar screen in the USS Ronald Reagan's Combat Information Center lit up simultaneously like a Christmas tree on fire. Alarms shrieked. Officers shouted coordinates. And Admiral Richard Holbrook watched his worst nightmare materialize on the tactical display. The USS Connecticut was surfacing. But submarines don't surface like this. Not fast, not at emergency angles, not with the desperation of a drowning man clawing toward air. The Virginia-class attack submarine burst through the surface of the South China Sea like a breaching whale, 3,500 tons of steel and nuclear power propelled upward by ballast tanks blown in panic. Water cascaded off her hull in torrents, her bow rising at a 15-degree angle before crashing back down, with an impact that could be heard across the strike group. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered in the CIC. Captain Morrison grabbed the radio. "Connecticut, this is Reagan Actual. Report your status." Static, then Captain Webb's voice came through, raw and breathless. "Reagan, we're alive, barely, hull integrity compromised. Sonar array destroyed. We need immediate assistance." Holbrook pushed his way to the communications station, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Captain Webb, what happened down there?" The silence that followed lasted only seconds but felt like hours. When Webb spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man who'd stared into the abyss. "We were hunted, Admiral, for 8 hours. Something shadowed us through every evasion maneuver, every depth change, every attempt to break contact. Advanced propulsion system, silent running capabilities beyond anything in our threat assessments. It was," Webb's voice cracked slightly, "it was the contact from Commander Chen's report. She was right about everything." The CIC went dead silent. Every officer within earshot heard it. Every sailor manning their stations understood what it meant. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, transferred in disgrace 3 weeks ago, had been correct, and they'd all watched her career burn for telling the truth. Holbrook felt the blood drain from his face. "Captain, are you certain?" "Admiral, my sonar operator has the recording. Before our array was damaged, we captured acoustic signatures that match Chen's data point for point. But there's more." Webb paused, and Holbrook could hear shouting in the background, damage reports being called out. "We weren't tracking one contact. There were at least 3 separate vessels coordinating. They boxed us in, forced us into a canyon system, then one of them. Admiral, one of them pinged us with active sonar so powerful it felt like a depth charge. That's what damaged our hull. They wanted us to know they could destroy us whenever they wanted." Captain Morrison looked at Holbrook with barely concealed anger. 3 vessels. How is that possible without any intelligence warning?" "Because we weren't looking," Holbrook said quietly, the full weight of his failure crushing down on him. "We dismissed the reports. We buried the warnings. He stopped, unable to finish. The radio crackled again. "Reagan, be advised. My sonar operator wrote down coordinates before we lost the array. He was a smart kid, knew we'd need evidence. The coordinates are tattooed on his arm now. A grim laugh. He didn't trust he'd remember them if he went into shock. Send them, Holbrook ordered. A minute later, the coordinates appeared on the screen. Lieutenant Chen, the communications officer, pulled up the historical data overlay. Her face went white. Sir, these coordinates, they're identical to the anomalous contacts Commander Chen reported. Not similar, identical, down to the decimal point. Around the CIC, officers exchanged glances. Some looked sick, others looked furious. They'd all been there that night when Admiral Holbrook had dismissed Sarah Chen's concerns. They'd all watched her walk off this ship in disgrace. And now they all knew, that she'd been trying to save them. Holbrook's executive officer, Captain Reynolds, pulled him aside. His voice was low, urgent. Sir, Pacific Command is going to crucify you for this. A submarine nearly destroyed, 134 sailors almost killed, and all because we ignored a credible threat assessment from our own analyst. I know, Holbrook said hollowly. You need to get ahead of this. Call Chen, apologize, get her back here to help. It's already done. Holbrook felt 100 years old. Admiral Thornton ordered it an hour ago. Chen should be in the air by now. On the ocean's surface, the USS Connecticut wallowed in the swells, her sleek Predator's profile marred by visible damage. A Coast Guard search and rescue helicopter from the Reagan approached, its spotlight illuminating the submarine's wounded hull. A 20-foot gash ran along the starboard ballast tank, not enough to sink her, but enough to make every man aboard thank God they'd made it to the surface. The Reagan's medical team was already mobilizing. 3 Connecticut sailors had been injured when the active sonar pulse hit, ruptured eardrums, one man thrown against a bulkhead hard enough to break his arm. But they were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. In the Connecticut's control room, Captain Webb stood gripping a handhold, watching his crew work with the efficient precision of men who just survived the impossible. His executive officer, Commander Lisa Torres, approached with a tablet displaying sonar recordings from their encounter. Captain, you need to see this. Before the array was destroyed, we got clean recordings of all 3 contacts. The acoustic signatures are revolutionary. They're using some kind of active noise cancellation combined with magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion. No propellers, almost no mechanical noise. It's like they're ghosts. Webb studied the data with professional detachment covering his shock. The Chinese. Has to be. But this technology, Captain, this is years ahead of what our intelligence assessments predicted. If they have 3 of these boats operational, they could be shadowing carrier groups across the entire Pacific without us knowing. Webb thought about Sarah Chen, the officer he'd never met but whose report had probably saved his crew's lives. Make sure those recordings are backed up on every system we have. Triple redundancy. When we get back to port, those files go straight to SUBLANT intelligence. And Commander, he met Tor's eyes. Make sure Commander Chen gets a copy personally. She earned that. Back on the Reagan, Holbrook stood in his quarters, staring at the phone in his hand. He'd rehearsed this call a dozen times in his head, trying to find words adequate to the situation. There weren't any. He dialed the number Pacific Command had provided. It rang 4 times before a woman answered, her voice thick with sleep. Hello. Commander Chen, this is Admiral Holbrook. The words came hard. I'm calling to inform you that the USS Connecticut has surfaced after an 8-hour engagement with unknown vessels. The contacts match your sonar report from 3 weeks ago. You were correct in your assessment, and I was wrong. Silence on the line. He could hear her breathing, could almost feel her processing what he'd said. How bad? Her voice was steady, professional, but he could hear the underlying emotion. Hull damage, 3 injured, but they're alive, Commander. They're alive because Captain Webb followed protocol and went dark when he detected the threat. If he hadn't, Holbrook couldn't finish that sentence. I need to see the sonar data, everything the Connecticut recorded. And Admiral, Sarah's voice turned hard. I need access to every sonar recording from the Reagan for the past 3 weeks. If there are 3 of these vessels out there, they've been in our operating area longer than we knew. I want to know exactly what we missed. You'll have full access. A helicopter is en route to pick you up from North Island. You'll be back on the Reagan by 900. Holbrook paused, knowing his next words wouldn't be enough but needing to say them anyway. Commander Chen, I owe you an apology. I dismissed your professional judgment. I allowed my ego to override good analysis, and I nearly cost American lives because of it. Another pause. When Sarah spoke, her voice was controlled but cold. With respect, Admiral, your apology means nothing to me right now. 134 sailors almost died because you wouldn't listen. 3 weeks ago, I could have helped track these vessels, map their patrol patterns, maybe even identify their base of operations. Instead, I've been in San Diego filing paperwork while they've been studying our fleet. You're right. I know I'm right. I've always been right. Now I need to figure out how to keep people alive despite your mistakes. The line went dead. Holbrook set down the phone and walked to his window, watching the first gray light of dawn spreading across the ocean. Somewhere out there, in the pre-dawn darkness, 3 Chinese submarines were gliding through the deep, silent and deadly and unknown. And the one person who could find them was flying back to clean up his mess. An aide knocked on his door. Sir, Admiral Thornton from Pacific Command is on Secure Line 1. She says it's urgent. Holbrook straightened his uniform and picked up the phone, knowing his career was about to end. Thornton, this is Holbrook. Rick, the Chief of Naval Operations, just woke me up personally. He's seen the preliminary reports. He wants to know why, and I'm quoting here, we have stealth submarines in the goddamn South China Sea that we knew about 3 weeks ago, but did nothing because some admiral's ego was too fragile to listen to his own experts. Her voice could have frozen nitrogen. I have no good answer for him. Do you? Holbrook closed his eyes. No, ma'am. I'm relieving you of tactical command effective immediately. Admiral Reeves will take over strike group operations. You'll remain aboard the Reagan as an observer until we determine next steps. She paused. And Rick, when Commander Chen gets there, you will give her everything she needs. You will defer to her expertise, and you will stay the hell out of her way. Is that clear? Crystal clear, ma'am. As the sun rose over the South China Sea, painting the waves gold and crimson, Sarah Chen sat in a helicopter racing toward the USS Ronald Reagan, listening to audio files through noise-canceling headphones. The Connecticut's recordings confirmed everything she'd suspected and more. She wasn't thinking about vindication or apologies. She was thinking about 3 stealth submarines and how to find them before they killed anyone else. The game had changed. And this time, everyone would listen. At 3:40 hours, every radar screen in the USS Ronald Reagan's Combat Information Center lit up simultaneously like a Christmas tree on fire. Alarms shrieked. Officers shouted coordinates. And Admiral Richard Holbrook watched his worst nightmare materialize on the tactical display. The USS Connecticut was surfacing. But submarines don't surface like this. Not fast, not at emergency angles, not with the desperation of a drowning man clawing toward air. The Virginia-class attack submarine burst through the surface of the South China Sea like a breaching whale, 3,500 tons of steel and nuclear power propelled upward by ballast tanks blown in panic. Water cascaded off her hull in torrents, her bow rising at a 15-degree angle before crashing back down, with an impact that could be heard across the strike group. Jesus Christ, someone whispered in the CIC. Captain Morrison grabbed the radio. Connecticut, this is Reagan Actual. Report your status. Static, then Captain Webb's voice came through, raw and breathless. Reagan, we're alive, barely, hull integrity compromised. Sonar array destroyed. We need immediate assistance. Holbrook pushed his way to the communications station, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Captain Webb, what happened down there?" The silence that followed lasted only seconds but felt like hours. When Webb spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man who'd stared into the abyss. "We were hunted, Admiral, for 8 hours. Something shadowed us through every evasion maneuver, every depth change, every attempt to break contact. Advanced propulsion system. Silent running capabilities beyond anything in our threat assessments. It was," Webb's voice cracked slightly, "it was the contact from Commander Chen's report. She was right about everything." The CIC went dead silent. Every officer within earshot heard it. Every sailor manning their stations understood what it meant. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, transferred in disgrace 3 weeks ago, had been correct, and they'd all watched her career burn for telling the truth. Holbrook felt the blood drain from his face. "Captain, are you certain?" "Admiral, my sonar operator has the recording. Before our array was damaged, we captured acoustic signatures that match Chen's data point for point. But there's more." Webb paused, and Holbrook could hear shouting in the background, damage reports being called out. "We weren't tracking one contact. There were at least 3 separate vessels coordinating. They boxed us in, forced us into a canyon system, then one of them. Admiral, one of them pinged us with active sonar so powerful it felt like a depth charge. That's what damaged our hull. They wanted us to know they could destroy us whenever they wanted." Captain Morrison looked at Holbrook with barely concealed anger. 3 vessels. How is that possible without any intelligence warning?" "Because we weren't looking," Holbrook said quietly, the full weight of his failure crushing down on him. "We dismissed the reports. We buried the warnings. He stopped, unable to finish. The radio crackled again. "Reagan, be advised. My sonar operator wrote down coordinates before we lost the array. He was a smart kid, knew we'd need evidence. The coordinates are tattooed on his arm now." A grim laugh. "He didn't trust he'd remember them if he went into shock." "Send them," Holbrook ordered. A minute later, the coordinates appeared on the screen. Lieutenant Chen, the communications officer, pulled up the historical data overlay. Her face went white. "Sir, these coordinates, they're identical to the anomalous contacts Commander Chen reported. Not similar, identical, down to the decimal point." Around the CIC, officers exchanged glances. Some looked sick, others looked furious. They'd all been there that night when Admiral Holbrook had dismissed Sarah Chen's concerns. They'd all watched her walk off this ship in disgrace. And now they all knew, that she'd been trying to save them. Holbrook's executive officer, Captain Reynolds, pulled him aside. His voice was low, urgent. "Sir, Pacific Command is going to crucify you for this. A submarine nearly destroyed, 134 sailors almost killed, and all because we ignored a credible threat assessment from our own analyst." "I know," Holbrook said hollowly. "You need to get ahead of this. Call Chen, apologize, get her back here to help." "It's already done." Holbrook felt 100 years old. "Admiral Thornton ordered it an hour ago. Chen should be in the air by now." On the ocean's surface, the USS Connecticut wallowed in the swells, her sleek Predator's profile marred by visible damage. A Coast Guard search and rescue helicopter from the Reagan approached, its spotlight illuminating the submarine's wounded hull. A 20-foot gash ran along the starboard ballast tank, not enough to sink her, but enough to make every man aboard thank God they'd made it to the surface. The Reagan's medical team was already mobilizing. 3 Connecticut sailors had been injured when the active sonar pulse hit, ruptured eardrums, one man thrown against a bulkhead hard enough to break his arm. But they were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. In the Connecticut's control room, Captain Webb stood gripping a handhold, watching his crew work with the efficient precision of men who just survived the impossible. His executive officer, Commander Lisa Torres, approached with a tablet displaying sonar recordings from their encounter. "Captain, you need to see this. Before the array was destroyed, we got clean recordings of all three contacts. The acoustic signatures are revolutionary there, using some kind of active noise cancellation combined with magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion. No propellers, almost no mechanical noise. It's like they're ghosts. Webb studied the data with professional detachment covering his shock. The Chinese. Has to be. But this technology, Captain, this is years ahead of what our intelligence assessments predicted. If they have 3 of these boats operational, they could be shadowing carrier groups across the entire Pacific without us knowing. Webb thought about Sarah Chen, the officer he'd never met but whose report had probably saved his crew's lives. Make sure those recordings are backed up on every system we have. Triple redundancy. When we get back to port, those files go straight to Sublant intelligence. And Commander, he met Tor's eyes. Make sure Commander Chen gets a copy personally. She earned that. Back on the Reagan, Holbrook stood in his quarters, staring at the phone in his hand. He'd rehearsed this call a dozen times in his head, trying to find words adequate to the situation. There weren't any. He dialed the number Pacific Command had provided. It rang 4 times before a woman answered, her voice thick with sleep. Hello. Commander Chen, this is Admiral Holbrook. The words came hard. I'm calling to inform you that the USS Connecticut has surfaced after an 8-hour engagement with unknown vessels. The contacts match your sonar report from 3 weeks ago. You were correct in your assessment, and I was wrong. Silence on the line. He could hear her breathing, could almost feel her processing what he'd said. How bad? Her voice was steady, professional, but he could hear the underlying emotion. Hull damage, 3 injured, but they're alive, Commander. They're alive because Captain Webb followed protocol and went dark when he detected the threat. If he hadn't, Holbrook couldn't finish that sentence. I need to see the sonar data, everything the Connecticut recorded. And Admiral, Sarah's voice turned hard. I need access to every sonar recording from the Reagan for the past 3 weeks. If there are 3 of these vessels out there, they've been in our operating area longer than we knew. I want to know exactly what we missed. You'll have full access. A helicopter is en route to pick you up from North Island. You'll be back on the Reagan by 900. Holbrook paused, knowing his next words wouldn't be enough but needing to say them anyway. Commander Chen, I owe you an apology. I dismissed your professional judgment. I allowed my ego to override good analysis, and I nearly cost American lives because of it. Another pause. When Sarah spoke, her voice was controlled but cold. With respect, Admiral, your apology means nothing to me right now. 134 sailors almost died because you wouldn't listen. 3 weeks ago, I could have helped track these vessels, map their patrol patterns, maybe even identified their base of operations. Instead, I've been in San Diego filing paperwork while they've been studying our fleet. You're right. I know I'm right. I've always been right. Now I need to figure out how to keep people alive despite your mistakes. The line went dead. Holbrook set down the phone and walked to his window, watching the first gray light of dawn spreading across the ocean. Somewhere out there, in the pre-dawn darkness, 3 Chinese submarines were gliding through the deep, silent and deadly and unknown. And the one person who could find them was flying back to clean up his mess. An aide knocked on his door. Sir, Admiral Thornton from Pacific Command is on Secure Line 1. She says it's urgent. Holbrook straightened his uniform and picked up the phone, knowing his career was about to end. Thornton, this is Holbrook. Rick, the Chief of Naval Operations, just woke me up personally. He's seen the preliminary reports. He wants to know why, and I'm quoting here, we have stealth submarines in the goddamn South China Sea that we knew about 3 weeks ago, but did nothing because some admiral's ego was too fragile to listen to his own experts. Her voice could have frozen nitrogen. I have no good answer for him. Do you? Holbrook closed his eyes. No, ma'am. I'm relieving you of tactical command effective immediately. Admiral Reeves will take over strike group operations. You'll remain aboard the Reagan as an observer until we determine next steps." She paused. "And Rick, when Commander Chen gets there, you will give her everything she needs. You will defer to her expertise, and you will stay the hell out of her way. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, ma'am." As the sun rose over the South China Sea, painting the waves gold and crimson, Sarah Chen sat in a helicopter racing toward the USS Ronald Reagan, listening to audio files through noise-canceling headphones. The Connecticut's recordings confirmed everything she'd suspected and more. She wasn't thinking about vindication or apologies. She was thinking about 3 stealth submarines and how to find them before they killed anyone else. The game had changed. And this time, everyone would listen. The SH-60 Seahawk helicopter cut through the morning sky at 140 knots, its rotors beating a rhythm that matched Sarah Chen's pounding heart. She sat strapped into the jump seat, noise-canceling headphones clamped over her ears, a secure tablet clutched in her lap displaying the Connecticut's sonar recordings. Every few seconds, she rewound the same 5-second segment, listening to the ghost that had nearly killed 134 American sailors. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, the acoustic signature of a predator that shouldn't exist. No propeller cavitation, no mechanical noise, just a faint, almost musical hum that cycled through frequencies like a living thing adapting to its environment. The Chinese had done it. They'd built a submarine that could hunt American carriers in plain sight, invisible to everything except the most sophisticated analysis. Analysis that she'd provided 3 weeks ago. Analysis that had been dismissed. Sarah closed her eyes, fighting back the rage that threatened to consume her. 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, she'd been exiled while these submarines mapped the Pacific Fleet's movements, studied their tactics, probed their defenses. How many carrier groups had been shadowed? How many submarines tracked? How much intelligence had been gathered while she filed paperwork about toilet paper requisitions? The pilot's voice crackled in her headphones. "Commander Chen will be feet wet in 5 minutes. Reagan is 30 miles ahead." Sarah looked out the window at the vast expanse of ocean below. Somewhere beneath those waves, the USS Connecticut was limping toward port, her crew traumatized and her hull scarred. And somewhere else, 3 Chinese submarines were watching, waiting, learning. "Copy," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotional storm inside her. As the carrier came into view, a gray fortress surrounded by its protective escorts, Sarah felt a complex knot of emotions. This had been her home for 8 months. These had been her shipmates, her colleagues, and they'd watched her be destroyed without saying a word. The helicopter touched down on the flight deck with practiced precision. As Sarah unbuckled and stepped out into the rotor wash, she saw the welcoming committee, Captain Morrison, several department heads, and conspicuously absent, Admiral Holbrook. Morrison approached, his expression a mixture of respect and shame. "Commander Chen, welcome back aboard. We've prepared your old workspace in the CIC. You have full access to all systems, all data, and unlimited support from every department on this ship." Sarah nodded curtly. "Where's Admiral Holbrook?" "In his quarters. He's been relieved of tactical command. Admiral Reeves from 7th Fleet is flying in this afternoon to take over strike group operations." "Good," Sarah thought but didn't say. "I need a briefing in 30 minutes. Every sonar operator, every acoustic technician, every officer who's been monitoring subsurface contacts for the past month. Conference room, not the CIC. I don't want anyone overhearing this." "Yes, ma'am," Morrison hesitated. "Commander, I want you to know." "Save it, Captain." Sarah's voice was ice. "We don't have time for apologies. We have time to find 3 submarines before they kill someone. That's all that matters right now." She walked past him toward the island superstructure, her sea bag slung over her shoulder, leaving Morrison standing on the flight deck looking like he'd been slapped. Inside the ship, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Sailors who'd avoided her eyes 3 weeks ago now pressed themselves against bulkheads to let her pass, murmuring "ma'am" with a respect that bordered on reverence. Word had spread with the speed that only shipboard gossip could achieve. Commander Chen had been right, the Admiral had been wrong, and people had almost died because of it. In the CIC, Petty Officer Reynolds practically jumped out of his chair when he saw her. "Commander Chen, ma'am, His voice cracked with emotion. "I kept recording everything like you said. I have 3 weeks of data logs, everything." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Good work, Reynolds. Get it all loaded into my station. And Reynolds, thank you for not giving up." His eyes glistened. "I always believed you, ma'am, always." 30 minutes later, Sarah stood at the head of a conference table surrounded by 15 officers and senior enlisted personnel, every person on the ship with acoustic analysis training. She'd changed into a fresh uniform, pulled her hair back, and transformed herself into the professional analyst she'd always been. But her eyes held an intensity that made everyone sit up straighter. "Here's what we know," she began without preamble, pulling up a tactical display on the wall screen. "The Chinese have developed a new class of diesel-electric submarine using air-independent propulsion and advanced acoustic dampening. At least 3 are operational in the South China Sea. They've been shadowing this carrier group for a minimum of 3 weeks, possibly longer." She clicked to the next slide, the sonar recording from 3 weeks ago that had destroyed her career. "This is the signature I detected on November 15th. Admiral Holbrook classified it as biological. It wasn't. This," she played the audio, the strange humming filling the room, "is what nearly killed the Connecticut's crew yesterday." The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Everyone in the room knew what she was really saying. This disaster could have been prevented. Sarah continued, her voice like a scalpel. "The technology they're using is sophisticated. No propellers, likely magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion or some variant. Active noise cancellation to mask mechanical sounds. Hull coatings that absorb sonar pings. They're essentially invisible to traditional detection methods." "How do we find them?" asked Lieutenant Commander Park, the tactical officer. "By being smarter than they are." Sarah pulled up a new display showing temperature gradients, current patterns, and salinity layers. "These boats may be quiet, but they're not magic. They still displace water. They still generate heat. They still have to maneuver. We find them by looking for the holes in the ocean, places where the environment doesn't behave the way it should." For the next 2 hours, Sarah walked them through a detection methodology she'd been developing during her exile. It combined traditional sonar with environmental analysis, looking for subtle disturbances that even stealth submarines couldn't avoid creating. Temperature inversions that shouldn't exist. Bioluminescent plankton disturbed by passing hulls. Changes in ambient noise patterns. It was brilliant. It was exhaustive. And it required resources that one carrier group couldn't provide alone. "We need more assets," Sarah concluded. "P-8 Poseidon aircraft for aerial magnetic anomaly detection, additional submarines for coordinated sonar sweeps, satellite thermal imaging for surface wake analysis, and most importantly," she looked at each officer in turn, "we need every ship in this strike group listening with everything they have. These submarines have been studying us. Now we study them." Captain Morrison spoke up. "Commander, Pacific Fleet Command has authorized whatever you need. Admiral Thornton has made it clear that you're running this operation. What's your first priority?" Sarah pulled up a chart showing the Connecticut's encounter. The Connecticut recorded coordinates before their sonar array was destroyed. Those coordinates show the last known positions of all 3 submarines. They're old data, 8 hours stale, but it's a starting point. I want to map their probable patrol sectors, identify their operational patterns, and predict where they'll be next. She zoomed in on a section of ocean. "Based on their behavior during the Connecticut encounter, I believe they're operating from a coordinated command structure. That means there's a mother ship or shore facility controlling them. Find the controller, and we find all of them." A knock on the door interrupted them. A young ensign entered, looking nervous. "Ma'am, I have a message from the Chief of Naval Operations. He's requesting a secure video conference with you in 15 minutes. The room went silent. The CNO, the highest-ranking officer in the United States Navy, wanted to talk to a lieutenant commander personally. That never happened unless something was catastrophically important. Sarah nodded. "Tell him I'll be ready." She looked at her team. "All of you get to work. I want preliminary analysis in 4 hours. Reynolds, you're with me. I need someone who can pull up sonar data during the conference." As the officers filed out, Morrison approached her quietly. "Sarah, the CNO doesn't take personal calls with junior officers unless he's planning something big. This is going to be bigger than just finding 3 submarines." "I know," Sarah replied. "This is about changing how the Navy thinks about threats, about making sure we never dismiss warnings again because someone's ego got in the way." She walked toward the Admiral's conference room, Reynolds trailing behind her. Down the passageway she passed Admiral Holbrook's quarters. The door was closed, no sound from within. The once mighty Admiral, reduced to waiting for his career to be officially ended. Sarah felt no satisfaction, only the weight of 134 lives that had almost been lost, and the urgent need to prevent it from happening again. In the secure conference room, she sat down in front of the video screen as it flickered to life. Admiral James Hardwick, Chief of Naval Operations, appeared, a 4-star admiral with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen combat in 3 wars. "Commander Chen," he began, his voice gravelly, "you just became the most important officer in the Pacific Fleet. Tell me how we're going to find these submarines before they sink one of my carriers." Sarah leaned forward, her exhaustion forgotten, her focus absolute. "Sir, here's what we're going to do." Sarah Chen hadn't slept in 48 hours, and she'd never felt more alive. The Combat Information Center of the USS Ronald Reagan had transformed into a war room unlike anything the carrier had ever seen. Every screen displayed overlapping data streams, sonar contacts, thermal imaging, current patterns, satellite feeds, and acoustic analyses that scrolled past faster than most officers could process. At the center of this technological maelstrom stood Sarah, her eyes bloodshot but laser-focused, orchestrating a symphony of detection that was rewriting submarine warfare doctrine in real time. "Contact bearing 285, range 14 miles, Reynolds called out from his station. "Thermal anomaly matches predictive model." Sarah moved to his screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Show me the bioluminescence patterns from that sector." A new display appeared, satellite imagery enhanced to detect microscopic plankton disturbed by water displacement. There, faint but unmistakable, was a glowing trail in the water. Something massive had passed through 20 minutes ago, disturbing millions of tiny organisms that now lit up like a highway in the dark. "That's our first ghost," Sarah breathed. "Designate contact Sierra 1. Get me a P8 overhead now, and I want the USS Howard moving to triangulation position immediately." Around her, the CIC erupted into controlled chaos. The destroyer USS Howard changed course, her powerful sonar arrays focusing on the coordinates Sarah had identified. Above the ocean, a P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft dropped sonobuoys in a precise pattern, creating a web of listening posts that even a stealth submarine couldn't avoid. Captain Morrison watched from the command platform, equal parts amazed and humbled. "Commander, how did you know it would be there?" Sarah pulled up a tactical overlay showing ocean currents, temperature gradients, and historical patrol patterns. "They're not random, Captain. They're systematic. Look," she traced a line across the map. "They're following the thermocline boundaries, using natural temperature layers to mask their signatures. But those same boundaries create predictable movement corridors. We can't hear them directly, but we can predict where they have to be." 3 hours into the hunt, they had their first solid confirmation. The P8's magnetic anomaly detector registered a massive ferromagnetic signature, the unmistakable presence of a steel hull where no ship should be. "Got you," Sarah whispered. On the tactical display, Sierra 1 materialized as a red contact symbol. For the first time in 3 weeks, they could see the ghost that had been haunting them. But Sarah wasn't satisfied with just one. "Reynolds, apply the same methodology to the Connecticut's recorded coordinates. If Sierra 1 is following thermocline boundaries, the other two should be doing the same. Calculate probable patrol sectors." 20 minutes later, her theory proved correct. A second thermal anomaly appeared 40 miles north, following an identical pattern. Then a third, positioned in a perfect triangle that would allow all 3 submarines to coordinate and cover maximum ocean area. "They're hunting in a wolf pack," Lieutenant Commander Park observed with professional dread. "If they'd decided to engage, they could have hit us from 3 directions simultaneously." Sarah nodded grimly. "They weren't here to attack, they were here to study us, to learn our patrol patterns, our response times, our tactics. This was reconnaissance." Admiral Reeves, who'd arrived 6 hours earlier to take tactical command, approached Sarah's station. He was a weathered submariner with 30 years of experience, and his expression showed deep respect. "Commander Chen, your methodology is extraordinary. With your permission, I'd like to transmit your detection protocols to every carrier group in the Pacific Fleet." "More than that, sir." Sarah pulled up a comprehensive briefing she'd been assembling. "These submarines are operating from a coordinated command structure, based on their patrol patterns and communication protocols. Yes, I found their communication protocols." She allowed herself a small, fierce smile. "I can identify their probable base of operations." She zoomed the map out to show the entire South China Sea. A red circle appeared around a cluster of islands in the Spratly chain. "Here, they're operating from Mischief Reef. The Chinese have been building it up for years, and everyone assumed it was just another island base. But look at the deep-water approaches, the submarine pens they constructed last year that satellite imagery showed. This isn't a surface facility, it's a submarine command center." The CIC went completely silent. If Sarah was right, and everything so far suggested she was, they just identified a major strategic asset in one of the most contested regions on Earth. Admiral Reeves studied the data, his jaw tightening. "This information goes straight to Pacific Command, and Commander," he met her eyes, "you just changed the strategic calculus for the entire theater." As the watch rotation changed and fresh officers took over the tracking operation, Sarah finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She walked to the forward windows of the CIC, looking out at the gray ocean where 3 submarines were now being tracked continuously. They couldn't hide anymore. The hunters had become the hunted. A reflection appeared in the glass beside her. Admiral Holbrook stood behind her, looking like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. His uniform was rumpled, his face haggard. He was no longer the commanding admiral who dismissed her warnings, just a broken man witnessing his own obsolescence. "Commander Chen," he said quietly, "may I have a word?" Sarah turned, her expression unreadable. Around the CIC, conversation stopped as officers watched this confrontation. "I won't insult you with excuses," Holbrook began, his voice rough. "What I did to you was wrong, professionally wrong, morally wrong. I let my ego override good judgment and people almost died because of it." He paused, struggling with words. "I spent 40 years in the Navy thinking I knew everything, that my experience meant I was always right. You showed me that expertise matters more than rank, that data matters more than ego. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I'm deeply sorry." Sarah studied him for a long moment. She could see the genuine remorse in his eyes, the weight of failure crushing him. Part of her wanted to lash out, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain and humiliation she'd endured. But another part, the part that was still a naval officer, still believed in the institution despite its flaws, recognized something else. "Admiral," she said carefully, "your apology doesn't change what happened. It doesn't give me back 3 weeks of my career or undo the damage to my reputation. But," she gestured at the displays around them, showing 3 tracked submarines, "what matters now is that we learn from this, that the Navy learns from this." Holbrook nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I've submitted my resignation. It will be accepted." "I know," Sarah replied. "And honestly, sir, that's appropriate. Not because you made one mistake, but because that mistake almost cost lives." She softened slightly. "But I hope you'll use whatever time you have left in service to make sure this never happens again. Make sure junior officers know their expertise will be heard. Make sure data isn't dismissed because of rank or ego." "I will, you have my word." As Holbrook walked away, Captain Morrison approached Sarah. "That was generous of you." "It wasn't generous," Sarah corrected. "It was necessary. If we spend all our time seeking revenge, we don't spend enough time preventing the next disaster." The captain's radio crackled. "Sir, Pacific Command on secure line. They want Commander Chen." Sarah returned to the conference room where Admiral Thornton appeared on screen, accompanied by the Secretary of the Navy and the Chief of Naval Operations. Their expressions were grave but impressed. "Commander Chen," Secretary Winters began, "your work over the past 48 hours has provided us with the most significant intelligence breakthrough in the Pacific theater in a decade. The President has been briefed. We're implementing your detection protocols fleet-wide, effective immediately." Admiral Hardwick, the CNO, leaned forward. "We're also creating a new position, Director of Advanced Submarine Threat Analysis, reporting directly to Pacific Fleet Command. Commander Chen, I'm offering you the job and immediate promotion to captain. You'll have resources, authority, and most importantly, you'll have a guarantee. When you report a threat, people will listen." Sarah felt the weight of the offer. Captain, a position of real authority, the ability to ensure that no analyst would ever be silenced the way she had been. "I accept, sir, on one condition." Hardwick raised an eyebrow. "Name it." "Every officer involved in threat analysis, regardless of rank, regardless of gender, gets the same protection. Their assessments are reviewed on merit, not on whether they contradict a senior officer's opinion. We create a formal protocol in writing that makes it clear, expertise trumps ego, always." The secretary smiled. "Done. We're calling it the Chen Protocol." After the call ended, Sarah walked back into the CIC where her team continued tracking the submarines. Reynolds gave her a thumbs up. Lieutenant Park nodded with respect. Even officers who'd avoided her 3 weeks ago now looked at her like she just won the war single-handedly. But Sarah knew the truth. She hadn't won anything. She'd simply proven what should have been obvious all along, that the truth matters, that expertise matters, that listening to warnings can save lives. On the main display, 3 red symbols marked the Chinese submarines, now tracked continuously, their secrets exposed, their advantage neutralized. Sarah Chen had been removed from this carrier in disgrace. She'd returned as the officer who'd changed everything. 6 months after the USS Connecticut surfaced with a scarred hull and a traumatized crew, Captain Sarah Chen stood in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, sunlight streaming through tall windows and illuminating the faces of admirals, senators, and military officials who had gathered for a ceremony that would change naval history. The room smelled of brass polish and fresh flowers. American flags lined the walls alongside portraits of legendary naval commanders, Nimitz, Halsey, Rickover. Sarah's parents sat in the front row, her mother clutching a handkerchief, her father wearing his old Navy uniform from his enlisted days decades ago. Behind them sat the crew of the USS Connecticut, every sailor who'd survived that 8-hour hunt in the depths, each one insisting on attending to honor the woman who'd tried to save them before anyone knew they needed saving. The Secretary of the Navy, Thomas Winters, stepped to the podium. The room fell silent except for the soft click of photographers' cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to recognize exceptional service that exemplifies the highest traditions of the United States Navy. Captain Sarah Chen's story is not just about technical brilliance or analytical excellence, though she possesses both in abundance. It's about courage, the courage to speak truth to power even when that power refuses to listen. Sarah stood at attention in her dress whites, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. She'd imagined this scene during those dark weeks in San Diego, filing paperwork and wondering if her career was over. But in her imagination, it had felt like vindication. Now, standing here, it felt more like a memorial for all the officers who'd been dismissed, ignored, or destroyed for telling inconvenient truths. Secretary Winters continued, his voice resonating through the chamber. 6 months ago, Lieutenant Commander Chen detected an anomalous sonar signature in the South China Sea. Despite her 12 years of expertise in acoustic analysis, despite her flawless service record, her warning was dismissed. She was transferred, effectively banished, for doing her job correctly. 3 weeks later, the USS Connecticut was nearly destroyed by the exact threat she had identified. The Connecticut's captain, Marcus Webb, sat in his wheelchair, still recovering from injuries sustained during the attack. His hands gripped the armrests tightly, and Sarah could see tears streaming down his face. Captain Chen's subsequent analysis, Winters went on, led to the identification and tracking of 3 advanced Chinese submarines, the discovery of their command facility, and the development of detection protocols now used throughout the Pacific Fleet. Her work has fundamentally altered how the United States Navy approaches submarine warfare in the modern era. He picked up a blue ribbon with a star-shaped medal suspended from it, the Legion of Merit, one of the highest peacetime military decorations. Captain Sarah Chen, for exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services and achievements, for analytical brilliance that prevented catastrophic loss of life, and for courage in the face of institutional resistance, I present you with the Legion of Merit. As Winters pinned the medal to her uniform, Sarah's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. The room erupted in applause, not the polite clapping of military ceremonies, but genuine, thunderous appreciation. Officers stood. Sailors cheered. Her mother sobbed openly. When the applause finally subsided, Winters smiled. Captain Chen has agreed to say a few words. Sarah approached the podium, her heart hammering. She'd written a speech, revised it a dozen times, practiced it in her quarters. But now, looking at the faces before her, the Connecticut survivors, the junior officers watching with hope in their eyes, her parents glowing with pride, she set aside her notes. 6 months ago, she began, her voice steady, I stood on the deck of the USS Ronald Reagan watching my career end because I reported what my instruments and my expertise told me was true. I felt angry, betrayed. I wondered if 12 years of service meant nothing if one admiral could destroy it all with a single decision. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But the truth is, this wasn't about one admiral or one bad decision. It was about a culture that sometimes values hierarchy over expertise, that confuses disagreement with insubordination, that mistakes confidence for competence. Around the room, senior officers shifted uncomfortably. Good, Sarah thought, they should be uncomfortable. 134 sailors on the USS Connecticut almost died because the Navy ignored a warning. But here's what keeps me awake at night. How many other warnings have been ignored? How many other junior officers have had their careers destroyed for reporting inconvenient truths? How many disasters have we narrowly avoided without ever knowing? She looked directly at Admiral Hardwick, the Chief of Naval Operations, who nodded solemnly. This medal is an honor I'll treasure forever, but it shouldn't exist. I shouldn't be standing here because I shouldn't have been dismissed in the first place. A Navy that works correctly listens to its experts regardless of rank. It evaluates data objectively. It creates systems where truth can't be silenced by ego. Sarah softened slightly. But I believe we can do better. The Chen Protocol, and I still can't believe they named it after me. Gentle laughter rippled through the room. Is a start. It requires that threat assessments from qualified analysts be reviewed independently, that technical expertise be valued equally with command experience, that junior officers have protected channels to report concerns without fear of retaliation. She looked at the Connecticut survivors. Will this protocol prevent every mistake? No. Will it save every life? I wish I could say yes, but I can't promise that. What I can promise is that we're trying. We're learning. We're building a Navy where expertise matters, where data matters, where speaking truth is rewarded instead of punished. Captain Webb raised his hand slightly from his wheelchair. A silent salute that Sarah returned with emotion threatening to overwhelm her composure. To every analyst, every technician, every junior officer watching this, your voice matters, your expertise matters. If you see something wrong, report it. Document it, fight for it. Yes, there might be consequences. Yes, you might face resistance, but you might also save lives. She touched the medal on her chest. This belongs to every officer who was silenced and every officer who refused to stay silent. To Admiral Jack Brennan, who tried to warn about these threats 20 years ago and was dismissed. To Petty Officer Reynolds, who kept recording data even after I was removed because he believed the truth mattered more than politics. To Captain Webb and the Connecticut crew, who survived because they trusted their training even when the system failed them. Sarah's voice grew stronger. The Navy I joined 12 years ago was an institution I believed in. I still believe in it. But belief requires holding ourselves accountable when we fail. It requires changing systems that don't work. It requires admitting that sometimes the loudest voice in the room should be the one with the most expertise, not the one with the most stars on their collar. The silence in the room was profound. Thank you for this honor, thank you for listening, and thank you for being willing to change. That's all any of us can ask. The applause was deafening. After the ceremony, Sarah stood in a Pentagon corridor checking her phone. Amid congratulatory messages from colleagues worldwide, one caught her attention, a secure message from Pacific Fleet Command. Captain Chen, we have a new anomalous sonar contact off Guam. Signature doesn't match the Chinese boats. Need your analysis immediately. Sarah smiled, not with satisfaction but with purpose. The hunt never ended. Threats never stopped emerging, but now when she reported them, people would listen. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Admiral Holbrook, who'd retired quietly 3 months ago to a desk job in Nebraska, counting inventory and contemplating his failures. Saw the ceremony on the Navy network. You deserved every word of that recognition. Thank you for not giving up, even when I gave you every reason to. The Navy is better because you stayed. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a reply. The Navy is better when we all do better. Take care of yourself, Admiral. She deleted Admiral and wrote Rick instead. Then she hit send. In the Hall of Heroes, her parents waited with Captain Webb and his crew. They wanted photos, wanted to celebrate, wanted this moment to last. And it would last, in the archives, in the protocols, in the cultural shift that was slowly transforming how the Navy valued expertise. But Sarah's mind was already moving forward, already analyzing the new contact off Guam, already planning detection protocols and resource allocations. Because she wasn't just an officer who'd been vindicated. She was an officer who'd proven that sometimes being removed from the carrier was just the beginning of the story. Sometimes the quietest voice carried the most important warning. And sometimes, finally, gratefully, necessarily, people were ready to listen. Sarah Chen had been dismissed for telling the truth. She'd returned as the woman who changed how the Navy heard it. The medal gleamed on her chest as she walked toward the exit, toward the car waiting to take her to Andrews Air Force Base, toward the aircraft that would carry her back to the Pacific, back to the hunt, back to the endless ocean where threats lurked and vigilance never slept. She was ready. The end.